challenge the federal government and allow the state to either license or actually distribute. So for those of us not from California, you can see the retail-like environment of access to medical cannabis out there. It is starting to emerge in states like Nevada and here in Colorado. This is nothing like what's going on out east, let alone a state actually getting involved in it. So I think Rhode Island has a good chance of becoming the first state that actually, at least challenging the federal government on distributing cannabis, not just sort of allowing it in a highly decriminalized manner. California and Oregon, this is a great example of how when you elect legislators who reflect your mores and values, you might actually get semblance of sane laws coming down the path. So there was a case that came in the Supreme Court in California about 2 months ago. It was Ross versus Rage Wire. Been pending for a couple of years, very important case. It essentially said that, you know, if you're a medical marijuana user and your employer wants to drug test you, particularly if they're under some sort of federal guideline to do so, they can do it. And so, thankfully, California immediately started to move to pass legislation to protect patients in the workplace, and that has a good chance of passing, I believe. Let's see if the governor will sign it. Oregon hasn't forwarded any legislation yet, but there are efforts underway, and it seems like a right place to actually get those protections out to patients. I'd like to acknowledge two things here. One is that one of the first states that decriminalized in the 70s, Nebraska, tried to recriminalize marijuana this past year. And Don Fiedler, who was NORML's director from 1989 to 1991, he passed away about a month ago. Don was a brilliant lawyer. And one of his last acts, if you will, as a lawyer, was to lobby for NORML in Nebraska. And while he couldn't beat down the efforts to amend the law, he came up with a great compromise, and that was, rather than to recriminalize proper, they simply raised the fine based on the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. That was the compromise. So in Nebraska, it's still decriminalized. You simply have to pay a little bit more, and we can thank Don Fiedler for that.
Thank you, Don.
Yay, Don.
And then lastly, we have here in Denver, and then up in Minnesota is going to be the RNC and DNC conventions. None of the groups, MPP, NORML, DPA, ASA, nobody is going to be able to impress upon these candidates to legalize marijuana, to decriminalize marijuana, or frankly, even to make it available to the sick, dying, or sense-threatened. So the thing that we're going to impress upon them, and I'm going to certainly ask my colleagues in Washington to join us in this endeavor, is to simply sort of return to the past, if you will, and ask for a presidential commission. We know that the Presidential Commission, just like every other major commissions ever convened on the topic of cannabis, always, all 14 of them since 1888, always say the drug should be decriminalized if not legalized. So we'd like to give one of these two candidates, a couple-year pass on this. They can, just like Keith and others in 1970 agitated for the Schaefer Commission. And even though you can listen to Richard Nixon screaming at Governor Schaefer when he comes into the room to tell him that they want to advocate to decriminalize marijuana, of course Nixon said it was DOA. Well, Keith took that as a writ and went to all 50 states, and one of the reasons why 1/3 of the United States, the citizenry of the United States, live in a municipality or state where marijuana is decriminalized was because they took that as a writ and went to all 50 states and said, listen, you can deviate from the federal law. So even though I know it's terribly incremental, and it's boring, and it's not sexy, I think a presidential commission is what we're going to be asking for whoever wins this presidential sweepstakes. NORML's webpage is incredibly hot right now. And I think back to all the years that NORML's been around, and we used to begin with running off newspaper and mimeographs, and then we've moved to copying machines and fax machines. And today, roughly 35,000 people a day come to the NORML page. They download 1.5 million pages of information a day. 30,000 people a day listen to Russell's great podcast that comes off at 4:20 every day. We introduced, after the last NORML legal seminar meeting in December, Jerry Merritt and others really said NORML should have blogs. And so we introduced blogs. The blogs have taken off. What we're going to do is introduce an NLC blog. And what I'm inviting you to do is to be part of this. It's a great thing for your business. It's a great way to get out intellectual information. And so we're going to be asking members of the NLC, 585 members of NORML's legal committee, When I joined NORML in 1991, we had 135 lawyers on the committee. Now we have almost 600. And so we're hoping that you'll join us in this publishing endeavor and reach out to these hundreds of thousands of people that read these blogs every day and week. We have a project that's going to come up, and I'm just going to allude to it. George will talk about it later in the day, George Rohrabacher. But on the 10th of October, the 20 millionth American will have been arrested on marijuana charges. And so we have some important components of an advertising effort here. We have the photograph of the very first person ever arrested for marijuana under federal law, Samuel Caldwell. We know the date of the arrests. We know the 20 millionth arrest. And so we're going to be launching a campaign this summer to try to bring attention to the 20 millionth arrest. Now, of course, who cares, 20 million? That's such a round number. 17.5 million suck just as much. But for whatever reason, in our society, we try to gravitate towards these lovely round numbers. And lastly, the NORML conference this year, I just signed the contract, is October 17th through the 19th in Berkeley. We'll put out information in a couple of days about all the codes. For those of you who are lawyers who have never come to a NORML conference, please consider going. While seminars are great, the NORML conferences have 500 to 600 people there, and while the legal committee is a major component of it, matter of fact, Michael Stepanian came and gave us an incredible keynote speech last year, a great example of how the NLC is the horseshit and bubblegum that holds the organization together.